Let's look at how the social landscape, the allocation of people in the country, has changed dramatically in this century. Most important fact, 51% of Americans live in only 9 states. That is a very, very, very intense exaggeration of a trend from rural to urban that has been going on since the United States was founded. But now that we've reached this tipping point and there are just 9 states with the majority of the population, the next question is, how many of those states are politically competitive? In only 2 of those 9 states was the plurality in the last presidential election less than 2%. The others were not very competitive. So in 7 out of the 9 biggest states in the United States, the 2 parties didn't have much reason to compete with each other. They didn't have good reasons to allocate campaign spending or visits by candidates or to change policies to appeal to the people. They were motivated to write off all of those people. 7 out of the 9 biggest states in population, 41% of Americans. Now let's look at the remaining 42 jurisdictions, 41 states and the District of Columbia. In only 4 of those was the plurality in the 2016 election less than 2%. In 38 of them, neither party had a very good reason to compete against the other to try to win the plurality of the voters. In those 38 jurisdictions, 42% of the population was written off. 42 plus 41 is 83. 83% of the population of America, because of the oddness of the Electoral College system as it exists and operates in the 21st century, 83% of the population of the United States essentially didn't matter, or to put it another way, was ignored by the 2 campaigns operating in tandem. Not because they were cruel, not because they were indifferent, not because the voters in those states were less well informed or cared less about the country or weren't really Americans or weren't really patriots, but because of the system. More than 4 out of every 5 Americans lived in states where neither party competed for turnout. It isn't that voters are dumb or lazy or don't care. It's that the system says to the 2 parties in our duopoly, it's not really important for you to compete for the votes of about 8 out of 10 Americans. People don't vote because campaigns don't seek their votes. This is nothing like what we see in the business climate, for example. Imagine Apple selling the iPhone. Imagine Apple saying, we're just going to give up in states that have 8 out of 10 people. It's inconceivable. It's inconceivable that any national brand that is nationally marketed would only be sold in states with 17% of the population. But that's the way the American presidential selection system works. The result of that is that presidential policies target swing states, and they divide the nation. The result of that is that the framers' original vision, which was of majoritarian democracy, a majority composed of many different factions with different points of view, that vision is frustrated and thwarted by the social landscape combined with the presidential selection system. As I said, it hasn't always been like this, but this is the way it is in the 21st century. So what's the solution? Well, the candidates must seek the most votes nationwide so as to win the Electoral College. In other words, we don't need to get rid of the Electoral College. We need to change the system so that the Republican candidate and the Democratic candidate both have strong incentives to seek a majority composed of most voters all across the country. How do Americans feel when you ask them, do you think that the person that wins the national popular vote should always be the president? And the answer is the voters say, that's exactly what I would like to have be the system. 74% support the idea that whoever wins the national popular vote would always be the president. And Donald Trump says the same thing, quote, I would rather see it where you went with simple votes, unquote.